السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. بسم الله والحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله. What is the most important part of the curriculum? The most important part of the curriculum, brothers and sisters, ladies and gentlemen, educators around the world, is not the effectiveness of the information, the assessment, is not teaching, learning. The most important part of the curriculum is first and foremost to understand who are you trying to teach. Who are the people who are receiving this information? If you don't know who you will be giving this curriculum to, this information, the how and the what doesn't really matter. One of the greatest mistakes that companies around the world, recruitment companies, governments, Ministry of Education, who are into education reform and they want to improve the quality of education in their countries, one of the main issue is that they do not understand who they give this information to. They do not study the people, their differences, their culture, their religion, to understand who these people are and what's the best way to give them this education. You would think they would. Actually, the colonizers, they did this very well. The colonizers, when they came with the intention of removing things from the countries, taking their wealth, the resources, and so on, they did their homework. They did it very well, and they were very successful. However, governments today, they don't do their due diligence in understanding or helping those who are coming into their countries to implement these education systems to understand who they are dealing with and what's the best way to give them this information, and whether this information is even good to give them or is going to cause more damage, like in the case of many countries in the Middle East. So what happens is that, just put it in perspective, a lot of countries, they hire people from overseas. They bring these educational consultants and they say, okay, you will reform our education system because your education system is just amazing. It's perfect, right? There's no problems in your country. You don't have shootings in your schools. You don't have stabbings in your school. You don't have drug problems in your school. You don't have premarital sex in your school. Hence, your education system must be perfect. Is it? Of course, this is a fallacy. However, because of the inferiority complex of countries around the world, they look at the West for, of course, as a savior type of figure. So they bring in the saviors and they find that actually they pay them a lot of money. They invest tons of money. And nothing happens. 10 years, a decade, where you should be showing, results should be very evident. Nothing happens in years. If not, sometimes it actually goes back. It has a negative impact. These so-called consultants taking a lot of money, they come into the country. Of course, they speak very good English. They're very educated on paper, and they might be educated, of course, in their skills and so on. We're not taking away from that. But the problem is that they don't contextualize that knowledge. They don't know how to apply that knowledge. They don't apply that PhD, that master's, the research that they've done. Because the main point in a research project is that you have to be careful of external factors. And the greatest external factor they tend to omit is the culture of these people and their differences and the influence and their background, identity, that you can't just shove in certain information. You can't just parachute a amended curriculum. It might be New South Wales, it might be a Canadian curriculum, it might be a Cambridge, it might be Common Core Standards, whatever. You just change a few things and then you say, hey, here's the curriculum, pay me a lot of money, let's do it. And then you start buying the iPads, you start investing in the labs and the books, which don't represent, and a lot of times, not all the times, but a lot of times don't represent the people of the land. And then you find after a decade that you spent a lot of money and you're left with not a lot. You haven't really progressed and you wonder why. And this is where you lose a lot of money, because in the end of the day, you have to understand, lack of efficiency, investment, no return, this is all cost. In the end of the day, time will cost you. In the end of the day, turnover rate will cost you. And cost affects the budget. which affects the way the governments look at the Minister of Education and the people they give the budget to, which obviously will affect in people being terminated, new people being brought in with new ideas. Hey, let's do it again. I have another bright idea. Again, the main mistake is you don't know who you are dealing with. If you would know who you're dealing with, then you wouldn't be losing money, because then you would know the best way to give it to them. For example, the Muslims in the Middle East, you're not going to be able to bring in a New South Wales curriculum or IGCSEs or so. It'll go through private schools, international schools, a mix of locals and internationals. But in the end of the day, you won't be able to reach your objective. You need to study and understand the culture of the people, the religion of the people. And if you want to educate them sincerely, as opposed to changing their culture and making them so-called global citizens, then it's a different story. If you want to give them education, you have the sincerity in your heart that you want to help these people to lift their status quo and their lives, then it's a different story. But if not, if your intention is to remove their religion, to remove their culture, their identity, be it that it's systemized or not, then you have a problem, because you're going to be costing our governments money. Putting aside the fancy accent, the fancy diplomas and degrees, the fancy suit, the fancy cars and all that you come in, you will cost the government's money. And then you just pack up one day and just go. I do not want to necessarily give specifics on this, but I believe if anyone does a bit of research as to the education reforms that are taking place in the Middle East, they'll be able to identify specifics and names and educational systems who have failed because of this. So I'm not trying to make this very academic, where I'm going to have to cite my information. You can do a bit of research for the purpose of brevity. But imagine if you could bring in people who understand, who are trained, who have cultural training, understanding, who have sensitivity, cultural sensitive education, and they have the training and the ability. They do the curriculum adaptations, design based on knowledge of the people that they are dealing with. Imagine how much money you could save. Not just that, imagine that you would meet your KPIs, your objectives, and you would lift the level of education amongst your people, your locals. You don't want turnover rates. You don't want to waste time. You don't want people who come in and teach your children their own idea of how this curriculum should be interpreted, their own cultural aspects of things. And then if they don't like it after a few weeks, they just pack up and leave. It may be 6 months, it may be a year, 2 years, if we are blessed with such a long term. But most of them will leave within a few weeks, within a few months. They'll come in, visit a few countries in the area, sadly. And again, I refer you to do a bit of research in the Middle Eastern education reform, and you'll find the turnover rate in some cases was 60-70%. Teachers would come, the investment to bring them over, the visa, the medical care, the packages, the salaries, the flight tickets, the tickets for the flights, the families, and all that, accommodation. And then within a month or 2 months, someone just decides, you know what, it's not for me. These people are backwards, I'm going to go and leave. Where's the ethics and the morals that you were looking and hoping to get from these people? Where's the due diligence and researching in hiring? You just hire someone because of passport color, because of accent, because of a degree. That is not best practices, of course. So to save you money, my recommendation as an educational I wouldn't say expert, but as a person who loves education and who's been in it for a while, started as a teacher and moved up, climbed up the ladder to be a director, principal, and so on, started schools, I would say that you need to pay attention to who do you recruit, first and foremost. What's the intention, which is difficult to understand, but at least to do your utmost to understand that. And then the training, the cultural awareness, the training, the cultural sensitivity will help both sides. Will help you from losing money and losing staff, and will help them from destroying their lives and leaving everything back home and then coming to a new country, and then all of a sudden, coming to a new country, and then all of a sudden, having to leave because they don't like it, right? So my advice to governments and so on is to Take your time, hire the right people, hire people like myself who understand this, who can train your staff, who can train teachers, who can train people in cultural sensitive education, curriculum design that is meaningful, that puts first and foremost the people that this curriculum will be given to. So educational, cultural, sensitive systems are something that are very, very hard to find. And I advise the governments and the Ministry of Education to really invest in this if they wish good for their people, because education is the future. Education is the next generation. Education is empowerment. Education is power. Do it right. Don't just do it. Don't waste your money. You can hire someone like myself or others to help you to understand how to do it properly, to understand where the mistakes can be done ahead of time before you do it, and it'll cost you a lot more money. You can pay me and pay others like myself to do a good job, as opposed to throwing money out the window for turnover rates, investments that have gone wrong, people leaving, in 10 years, a decade of education reform, and nothing, no change, other than people are not good in English and in the language that you try to push on them, and they've lost their Arabic, they might have lost their culture, they might have lost some of their identity, their manners, their behaviors. So not here, not there. Now you might think this is a sales pitch. Well, guess what? It is. It is. But it's a sincere sales pitch to those people who really want to take sincere advice from someone who's experienced it all and has gone through these systems and has seen the flaws and can give you proof for that. Thank you so much. Assalamu alaikum.